Twin Blades in Elden Ring have it all. They have the damage, the speed, high mobility and insane status build-up. But most important, they have the moves. That is why today we're gonna take a deep dive into what makes the Twin Blade weapon category extremely powerful, how you can take advantage of that, and finally a combo that will make you into an unstoppable killing machine. Now there's 6 Twin Blades in total in Elden Ring, and with such a high range of different choices, you can probably fit one in almost any type of build. So we have the Twin Blade and the Godskin Peeler, which is amazing by default for dexterity users. Then we have the Twinned Knight Sword and the Gargoyle's Twin Blades, which is a great option for strength. Eleonora's Pole Blade meanwhile also scales up with Arcane, and finally Gargoyle's Black Blades is a pretty okay option for strength and faith hybrids. But only 4 of them can have their Ashes of War and affinities replaced, with the exception of course of Eleonora's Pole Blade and the Black Blades, which will unfortunately have to stay with their default options. Now there are some key differences between each Twin Blade that I will explain as this video progresses, but for the most part these 4 right here are by far the best options. Not only can you go ahead and change the affinities and the Ashes of War on them, but they also come with an absurd level of build-up scaling compared to literally any other weapon right now in the game. So bleed, poison and frost scaling will sometimes almost double compared to weapons that might even come with innate similar build-ups by default. So take for example the Mighty Katana. This weapon comes with 55 points into bleed by default. Even if you further buff that with another blood affinity, it's not going to be anywhere near on the same scale as a typical Twin Blade with just a blood affinity. So that is the level of craziness, but it goes beyond that. Which brings us to power stancing, as in equipping 2 of the same types of weapons at the same time and then using the jumping L1 attack or whatever the equivalent is on the keyboard and mouse when you use both of the weapons to attack at the same time. In this case, if you power stance these Twin Blades, you don't just get to transform into a god of status build-up, but also very high damage and quick attacks, because you don't just perform 1, 2 or 3 attacks, but 4 of them very fast in just 1 second. If this is your first playthrough, what you can do is to use 1 Twin Blade that you get early on in the game and a Godskin Peeler, since this is the best option for dexterity and of course arcane users. If you are on your second playthrough in Journey 2, or if you have a friend in multiplayer who can sacrifice one, you can also get a second Godskin Peeler and pretty much reach best in slot for this build. But in the meantime, I have done a bunch of tests to see exactly which affinity you should get for each stat and which one of these is the best suited for each type of build, so here it goes. In this case, the theory that I tested is that if you use too much blood build-up, you're actually losing a ton of DPS on a high arcane build compared to if you were to use an occult affinity instead. In this case, if I were to apply the seppuku with that occult affinity and a 60 points into arcane, the first bleed build-up will actually happen within the first 2 hits on this boss. For the next bleed build-up, again, I only need 2 consecutive attacks for that to pop, but for the 3rd and 4th one, this will increase. So the 3rd one actually requires 3 more consecutive attacks to proc, and then for the 4th one, a whole 5 consecutive attacks for that to even proc, and I will assume that it will only increase from here on out. And by the way, this still stays consistent if I use the, well, Godskin Peeler as well. Now, if I were to use the blood affinity with seppuku and have really high bleed build-up with this arcane build, I'm able to actually proc a first build within the first hit against the boss, which is good, but watch what happens next. Any subsequent attacks, just like in the case of the occult scaling, still require 2 consecutive attacks to proc the next build-ups, so that's going to be 2 more and 2 more, and that's basically going to happen from here on out, which means that at this point, with this high level of arcane, it's a much better option to instead work out and use occult affinity instead of blood affinity to get extra damage and relatively a similar amount of bleeds. As a matter of fact, the difference between the hits required to proc a bleed build-up between the occult and the blood affinity becomes almost non-existent when you actually add a second Twin Blade in the mix and power stance them. Reason being is because you have that L1 attack when you jump with it, which performs 4 attacks in quick succession, so you will literally proc a bleed build-up on every single one such attack if it fully connects with both of these affinities, as you can see right now on the same boss. This also translates similarly into numbers, so if you were to use a high arcane build like mine with 60 into arcane and then, well, for some reason use blood affinity, you only get 434 AR on the peeler, which yes, you can further buff with a white mask and a Lord of Blood exaltation to reach 612. Meanwhile, if I were to change to the occult, I'm literally getting 22% more damage, so 532 AR on the peeler by default, or 743 if you also add white mask and Lord of Blood exaltation when there is a bloodlust nearby. The basic TLDR here is that if you already use 2 maxed out twin blades, regardless which they are, and you already have high arcane on your build, it's much better to actually use that occult affinity, since it obviously scales way better in damage from your arcane. In other situations where you don't use high arcane, like for example if you were to use high dexterity, then yes, in this case you will want to switch from occult all the way to blood affinity, because this doesn't just increase the scaling on the weapon to a much better rank, but it also scales better your damage and you get comparable the same amount of bleeds as you were if you go with arcane and vice versa. For strength users who want similar options without spending any points into dexterity, or well, few of them into that and arcane, then the Twin Knight Sword and the Gargoyle's Twin Blades are the option for you. In this case, you can also create a similar bleed build-up with strength as well. But of course, Gargoyle's Twin Blade is the better option here, so you can either duplicate this through the methods I've talked about previously, or just have a Twin Knight Sword, which is slightly weaker version of this, but you can use it in your first playthrough. Now there's a few options you can use these in: either power stance both of these at the same time and then provide a ton more bleeds with the seppuku, but in this case you would obviously want to use the blood affinity since you're lacking any arcane. If you were to go ahead and also use a shield, it's still totally possible. In this case, I totally recommend the Gargoyle's Twin Blade. It's amazing for a few reasons. You can change the astrovore on it and as a result the affinity, but at the same time, if you don't want to do that and keep the spinning slash, you can also imbue it with enchants and armaments, so you can play with a hybrid that uses either faith or even intelligence. And speaking of faith and intelligence, there was also the option with Gargoyle's Black Blades. This uses strength and faith scaling, but also comes with holy damage. Unfortunately, the Ashes of War on it cannot be changed, so it's literally the weakest of the twin blades in the game, at least when you consider max level and end game. And of course, Eleonora's Pole Blade was the final one that I didn't talk about, simply because it's not the best in the game. The two previous ones I talked about give you way more options, way better damage, even though Eleonora, technically speaking, is the coolest looking in the game. But now that you're equipped with all of that knowledge, there's one thing left I want to show you, which is what happens if you combine two of these affinities with their high scaling and making sure that they both proc at the same time. In this case, since there's only two affinities in the game that cause a build-up explosion, with the Bloodlust being one of them, the other one would be the Frost, or in this case the Frostbite build-up. And the result, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, is just absurd. You cause two build-up explosions at the same time for insane amounts of damage. And not just that, you don't just bleed the enemy, you also further debuff it by another 20% from the Frostbite, so this means any other following attack will deal even more damage, including, yes, of course, any subsequent, in this case, bleed build-ups. So this is something that will require a different kind of video to fully max out. You can also pretty much create something that provides multiple affinities at the same time, but the Frost and the Bleed at the same time are a very powerful combo that you should definitely check out right now, especially since Twin Blades have a very easy time to ensure you apply these on almost every hit. Now, on a final note, there's only one thing left to discuss, which is finding these weapons in the first place, so for everybody who missed them, here it goes. You can find the regular twin blades back at the Dragon Burnt Ruins, very close to the Agil Lake, so right here at the starting area inside the second room, not the first one. It's this one that only contains a chest and of course the reward inside. Now the Godskin Peeler is something you get from the Windmill Village up north in Altus Plateau, but you do have to defeat this Godskin Apostle and get the weapon from him. Meanwhile, for the Twinned Knight Blade, you can find it really close to this location at the East Windmill Pasture. It's going to be located right in the middle of this burning pile of corpses alongside a really cool armor set. The next one is going to be located in the Siofra River Aqueduct, so you do need to follow the way over there and fight a two-pair boss of gargoyles that will drop two weapons, including of course one of their gargoyle twin blades, which is also the best option for strength users. Meanwhile, for Eleonora's pole blade, you can simply go to the second church of Marika, also in the Altus Plateau, defeat the invasion, and this is also going to give you the weapon. And finally, you're going to find the black blades if you still want them from the Forbidden Lands, just reaching right here at the lift. Before it, there's going to be a kindred boss that attacks you and drops again two weapons, including the gargoyle's black blade, and that is pretty much it.